So what do you think is significant about the 20th of May 2008? It is of course the day all those years ago that Steven Moffat was officially announced as taking over as the showrunner of Doctor Who from 2010. And 9.5 years later, we've finally seen the end of his wonderful era. So this video is just a sort of thank you to Steven Moffat for essentially 10 nearly wonderful years of Doctor Who. So yes, as we reach the end on Christmas Day with Twice Upon a Time of his final episode, having so many years ago started filming, I believe it was the 21st of July 2009 that they started shooting The Time of Angels, the very first story of his that was shot all those years ago as well. It really has been a fantastically long era, but full of so many successes for me. I know it's always had a kind of mixed opinion with fans, but I really feel this era has been very strong and will go down much more positively sort of longer term, I think. I just feel Steven Moffat's just given so much to this show. He's really given his heart and his soul. He's showrun 6 full series of Doctor Who over the last 8 years or so, which is pretty amazing in itself. He's written nearly 50 episodes on his own. He's written an episode for every single series of Doctor Who since 2005. So Series 11 will most likely be the first series that doesn't have a Moffat episode in New Who history, which is pretty significant. So it cannot be understated how important he has been to the history of this show. And for me, he's done a huge amount of good things. I know people do like to say he's done lots of bad things for the show. And yes, he has made some mistakes. Yes, there have been some very bad ideas he's brought to this show. But that's the same in any show, any long-running TV show that has a main writer. Of course, there's bad episodes in there, there's duds. That's just the way it is. You can't physically, consistently produce the objectively amazing stories every single time. Of course, people love Hellbent, people hate Hellbent. It's a subjective episode you like, whereas Heaven Sent, for maybe 90% of the audience, is an objectively good episode of Doctor Who. But you're just not going to get that every single time, so I sort of feel you've kind of got to have that perspective and look. In comparison to the Russell T Davies era, where he also had a huge amount of ups and a huge amount of downs. Look at episodes like Love and Monsters that he wrote, which by most fans' admission is pretty crap, but he also wrote some amazing ones. Look at the series 1 finale, Bad Wolf Pulsing the Waves, that's phenomenal television. So every single showrunner is going to have these up and downs, and I don't think it's something you can just put at Moffat's door and say, oh, it's only Moffat who writes a bad episode, because it's just not true. And I feel Steven's just brought something so very different to this show that we haven't had up to this point. Certainly it was a complete change when we saw it in 2010 in Series 5 from what we'd had with the Russell T Davies era, where he'd really made the Doctor more human, had the character a bit more grounded to earth, with a lot more sort of, we'd see companions, families and all this kind of thing. It almost was more of a sort of soap opera-y drama kind of thing than an actual sort of sci-fi drama that maybe the Steven Moffat era, I feel, brought it a little bit more towards. Certainly early on it was maybe more fairy tale-esque than science fiction, but then kind of moved more towards that through his era, I think. And I think that was a really good move for the show. It needed it at the end of the Russell T Davies era to do something different. And I think Steven really was able to bring that massive change up, and I know the majority of fans would say that Series 5 is fantastic. It might even be his best series that he's done. He never topped that. It really just was objectively, I would say, a very strong series with barely a bad episode in it. He brought this more complicated storytelling to the show, which had its problems, worked both ways. Some people loved it, some people found it too confusing. He made sort of more arc-heavy stories. He brought these more interesting plots that weave through a series rather than just a magic word we'd hear every now and then in the RTD era. He really tried to be bold, I think, a bit more than Russell did at times, and just really threw these big ideas in and just sort of, let's wait and see what happens with it. And half of them don't work, half of them do work, but that's to be expected, and that's what Doctor Who's always been. It's been a show about change, it's been a show about experimenting with new ideas, and I think Steven did so much of that, which was fantastic. And the amount of amazing episodes he's written for the show is just sort of almost unlistable, really. I mean, obviously every single one of his before he became showrunner was fantastic. Then 11th Hour's amazing, the Angels 2-parter's very good, the Series 5 finale's fantastic, the Series 6 opener's fantastic. Yes, the rest of Series 6 is a bit naff, but that's just unfortunate. Series 7, it's not so great. Day of the Doctor, I mean, that's probably got to be Steven's greatest success, is Day of the Doctor. I know some people don't like it and some people have their problems with this episode, and it isn't perfect, but what he was sort of tasked with achieving was basically impossible. To have a story that celebrates 50 years of a show, bringing back multiple doctors, multiple companions, so many past characters and everything, and have a coherent plot to it and a point to it, and make it that big event show that it needed to be for the 50th anniversary on a budget that just wouldn't compare with most sort of film franchises that had that sort of challenge, I think was incredible. And that has got to be his greatest success, is pulling that off when he really needs to. And you just look at the viewing figures there, it was blooming 13 million or something on that night, which was just absolutely incredible. So I think that's probably got to be his biggest success. Of course, it didn't always go right. Series 6 kind of fell apart towards the end. The arc, just as much as it was a good idea, it just didn't quite work out in the end. He didn't maybe know quite how best to finish it off, and it just became, yeah, it didn't quite work. But that happens sometimes. Compare it to Series 5, which was a brilliantly sort of tight-knit arc. It almost feels like Series 5 was the series he'd been planning since he was a child, possibly. That sort of idea behind it, the whole cracks in time and everything, just felt so perfectly Steven Moffat, and really was so tightly knitted and worked really, really well. So it sort of showed that he could do a great arc, even if maybe he never topped that one. And just for me personally, it's been one of the most, such an important sort of era of the show, kind of for me, because I was just 12 years old when this era started way back in 2010. I can still remember the excitement on the sort of the Saturday of the 11th hour, out, and my friends all getting really excited about Doctor Who and discussing what's going to happen for the new series, because obviously there hadn't been a series since 2008 with just the special in 2009, so we've had sort of the best part 2 years without a full series again. So it was such an exciting moment to start it off, and it's led through my whole sort of teenage years through to 19 now. So it has had its ups and downs for me personally. I fell out of love with the show a little bit in sort of Series 7, certainly kind of 7A and most of 7B. I didn't watch every episode and I wasn't that engaged with it, but then Day of the Doctor just brought me back. It really brought me back into the show. Then Capaldi continued it on for me, and that's it. I've been hooked again since the end of 2013. I've been completely hooked on the show again. So it's just sort of Steven's cast two fantastic Doctors who have always been, well, Matt's maybe not so special to me, but certainly Peter Capaldi's probably is my Doctor, and has just been such a sort of special Doctor for me. So it just has been such an important era of the show in my life as well. And I'm sure there's a lot of you that are in this similar situation, of around a similar age to me, and joined watching the show for the first time in 2005, where we were really young back in the RTD era. So there's the nostalgia factor of the RTD era, but for me, there's still nostalgia, and certainly Series 5, 6, and even a bit of 7. The Capaldi era, maybe the nostalgia isn't quite so much there, but certainly that sort of early Moffat stuff I just look on so fondly of Series 5. The 11th Hour is just such a wonderful, magical story to start a series with, and then continuing that arc through the series, and then the finale is just fantastic for me. So it really does have a special place, and I thank Steven Moffat for that. And so yes, I would just say well done and thank you, Steven Moffat, for 7 or 8 amazing years of Doctor Who that you produced. It's probably one of the hardest jobs in television. It sounds amazing in theory to be showrunning and writing Doctor Who, but in reality you're having to pump out that series by series every single year with all the pressure on, and the hate you're naturally going to get just because people won't like all the things you do, having to sort of block that out and cope with it. I mean, you look at sort of Russell's era, when you read The Writer's Tale, that phenomenal book, that really just tells you how much of a struggle it was for Russell. I'm sure it was the same for Steven as well, having to sort of get up at 4 AM or something and staying up so late to try and finish off and get scripts off in time. It's such devotion, dedication required, and therefore is sometimes going to have the odd bad story, but I feel that he's just put everything into this show. And yes, towards the end of it, he probably was starting to run out of ideas, and there was a little bit of repetition. Maybe some of the stories weren't quite so strong. But I feel he always sort of really put his vision into Doctor Who, and he's grown the show so much globally, he really has. I mean, yes, the viewing figures have dropped in the UK, but you look at Doctor Who worldwide, it had a world tour in 2014 for Series 8. They went all over Asia and South America, were all over the shop promoting the show, because so many people across the world are interested in this show. And I just don't think that was the same back in the Russell T Davies era. There just wasn't that many people watching the show. Of course, back in Classic Who there was none of that, but certainly even in the Russell era, although it was a massive British phenomenon, it really just wasn't quite the same overseas, particularly in these kind of places. Whereas now, with Matt and now with Peter, it's just gone global. It really, really has, and that's something that Steven has achieved in his sort of era of running the show. And I think that's so important for the future of the show, that it's a really sort of worldwide renowned brand, not just a UK renowned brand. Even if it is slightly less popular in the UK, it can survive on its global sort of legacy and its global popularity, So that is probably one of the greatest things that Steven's done for Doctor Who as well. So it's going to be a weird one when we come around to Series 11, whenever we do eventually see it towards the end of this year, or next year, probably autumn time. It's going to be a funny one knowing that it's all so completely different, that there's no longer going to be a Steven Moffat written episode in a series. There's none of that. It's a completely different, going to be a completely different feel to the show, a completely different style, and that's something that I'm sort of a little bit sad about, but also super excited about, because as much as I say I've loved Steven Moffat's era, I'm ready for something new. I'm ready for the Chris Chibnall era to begin, and for us to have lots of breakdowns, discussion, excitement about Chris Chibnall and his vision for the show. What is his vision for the show? We just don't really know yet. What new ideas and what concepts is he going to bring to this show? That's what's so exciting about Series 11 and about Doctor Who in general, is this constant change and renewal of the show. And of course it's the first time since 2010 we've got this sort of a change, having a new showrunner and a completely new writer and a new direction for the show. So that's something that I'm really looking forward to, and hopefully it will really have that feel of the 11th hour, maybe the opener of Series 11, of feeling like this is a new start for Doctor Who. This is almost a reboot. This is almost a completely fresh start and a new feel to it. And that's what I really, really hope to see for the future of the show. But I'll never forget the Steven Moffat era. I don't think anybody will forget it either way, but certainly I'll always think fondly of these 7 years, these 6 wonderful series, pretty much all of which I have a huge amount of enjoyment of across the board. So thank you so much, Steven Moffat, for an amazing era of Doctor Who. But to finish off, I'd love to hear from you guys. What are your sort of overriding feelings on the Steven Moffat era as a whole? What things have you really liked about his tenure? What things have not worked so well in your sort of opinion? Have you got any kind of little sort of personal stories like I have about remembering that excitement of the 11th hour way back in 2010? I just love to hear what your guys' thoughts are on the Steven Moffat era as a whole. But other than that, guys, thank you very much for watching this video. Remember to like it, subscribe if you're new here, and I'll see you again very, very soon for another video. Goodbye.